All right. This is FDR. Title your notes, FDR. There are the essential questions. We will not get into any of those specific questions today. Today we're going to talk about FDR's background. Delano is actually his grandfather's last name. That's where we get that from. He was actually born in 1882 in Hyde Park, New York. It was about 70 or 80 miles north of New York City. He is the fifth cousin to Teddy Roosevelt, so a cousin. Well, very wealthy background. I mean, we're talking crazy rich here, people. Did a lot of traveling, was to Europe 8 times before he was 15. How many times have you guys been to Europe? Only child in a huge house. At the age of 14, he had a 21-foot sailboat. His father hired him a captain to teach him how to sail. He had tutors, went to dancing schools, hunted and fished. Father was friends with President Cleveland and visited the White House quite often. Once Cleveland was having a hard time and the Roosevelts were about to leave, and Cleveland leaned over and said, "Franklin, I have just one wish for you. Pray to God he," meaning FDR's dad, "will never let you become president of the United States." Obviously, that turns quite prophetic. At age 14, he attends a private school in Groton, Massachusetts, where he learns the rich are responsible for helping the poor. There's young FDR right there. Not only is it nice to be rich, but you are responsible to lead. Okay, not the greatest athlete in the world. Was a manager for the baseball team there. He will actually go on to Harvard, and was an average student. Good. I mean, you got to be a good student to go to Harvard, but was average in Harvard's eyes. Like I said, not the greatest athlete. 6 foot tall, 140 pounds. He got cut from the football team, so he became a cheerleader. That's right, a cheerleader. His mother was overprotective and actually will move to Harvard to be close to Franklin during his college years. Just what you all want, I'm sure, is for your mom or dad or both to move with you to college. Yeah. In 1905, he married Eleanor, which actually happened to be Teddy's niece, Teddy Roosevelt's niece. So they were distant cousins, fifth cousins, which is legal, but I don't know. If you grew up together, kind of weird, which I don't believe they did. They will end up having 6 children, 5 boys and 1 girl. FDR Jr. will die. His firstborn son will die a year after he was born. So sad story there. His mother and Eleanor did not get along. There wasn't a lot of love between those two, so there was always issues there. In 1907, he attended Columbia Law School, and he actually passed the bar before he graduated, which is almost unheard of. So he didn't need his degree to be a lawyer, so he didn't graduate for Columbia. There's no reason to. Law school is all about passing the bar. He passes it without finishing. So that was kind of a neat thing. He then runs for state senator in 1910, becomes a senator for the New York legislature, and runs for U.S. Senate, only loses, and then will actually become, under President Wilson, serve as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, which his cousin, Teddy, also held that. Okay, and once borrowed a destroyer for a family vacation. Now, you might notice this picture down here. This picture is of Lucy Mercer. Lucy Mercer. FDR had a long-time affair with Lucy Mercer, who happened to be Eleanor's social secretary. But they will continue to stay married. It was more of a marriage of convenience, and unfortunately for them, those were some of the things that went on back then. But The Secret Service even had a code word for Lucy Mercer. Her name was Mrs. Johnson. That was her code word for the Secret Service. The Roosevelts will stay married for 40 years until the day he died. And they'll have, we talked about their kids. There were 19 marriages in their family, 15 divorces, and 29 grandkids. So, interesting, to say the least. And Eleanor had an interesting, side story too. We'll talk about that later. In 1921, FDR. I skipped this. 1920, he runs as vice president under James M. Cox. That's the airport. The airport's named after him. And they lose to Harding. Okay, and he gets out of politics and goes back to practicing law and living the life of the rich. In 1921, at the age of 39, in his summer home in Canada, we all have summer homes, don't we? It's called Campobello. He fell off his yacht into the icy waters, and his body suffered severe shock. The next day, he went to help fight a forest fire near there, and then jumped back into the lake to kind of cool off into the icy waters again. When he got home, he sat around in his wet bathing suit for a while, and then started to get a pain in his legs and went to bed. The next morning, he had a crazy high fever and pain, and was basically paralyzed from his chest down. Belief is that the severe shock in both ways, heat and cold, caused this. He was stricken by infantile paralysis, also called polio. The pain was so bad in his immobile legs that he couldn't stand the weight of the sheets on his legs. Both legs had to be put into a cast, his back and his arms. His eyesight even seemed to be threatened. But Eleanor insisted on therapy. Okay, his mother, FDR's mother, was there babying him, of course. But Eleanor basically makes him use his arms. She would make meals, and she would make him crawl to the table to eat, because she believed that he had to learn how to get along in this way. He started some new therapy in Georgia. It's called Warm Springs in Georgia, and you can probably guess what's there, a warm spring. And the 88-degree water seemed to help him. He works very hard and actually will relearn to walk again using crutches and braces. In 1924, he takes a few steps at the Democratic Convention and gets a crazy ovation. And now Al Smith will lose that Democratic nomination to J.W. Davis, and they'll lose the election. But we have a new star in the Democratic Party, and in 1928 he becomes governor of New York. And during this time period, he'll initiate some new social programs that we'll see will basically be a good predecessor or a good indication of what he'll do as president. He'll get reelected to governor in 1932, and then he'll run for president. Now, FDR will never be able to walk again like he did before. Okay, look at these young pictures. Good-looking guy. There he is with Eleanor in 1905. But from here on out, you will very rarely see any picture of FDR standing. Okay, this is just one of the few pictures that you'll see FDR in a wheelchair. Most of the time, it's hidden behind a desk, and in fact, in the presidential desk that Barack Obama is using right now, it's called the I just forgot the name of it. But that desk has a little door on the front of it that was actually put there to hide the wheelchair for FDR. So very rarely will you see him standing, and I'll point these pictures out as we go through this. But if he is standing, he's always holding on to it. You know, his most famous speech, the Pearl Harbor speech, he is locked in, his legs are locked with those braces, and he's holding on to dear life to that podium. That podium wasn't there, he'd fall down like a tree. So he didn't want to be pitied. He didn't want to be seen as weak. So that's why you don't see that. That's one of the only pictures that you'll see. I believe his monument in D.C., you can see barely just a little wheel of the wheelchair, one of these little wheels up here, and that's the only indication that you'll see of that. Now, in 1932, okay, he wins very easily over Hoover. Okay, the electoral vote is 472 to 59. We've talked about Hoover's unpopularity. The problem was there is a long time between the election and March 4th. You can see this. This is a political cartoon called The Unfortunate Wait. Lane Duckville, okay? And in fact, there was an amendment to change this to speed up this whole process, the 20th Amendment, okay? And so he wins very easily over Hoover, but we have some time to wait. There was an assassination attempt on FDR during this time period. In fact, the Chicago mayor was killed in this, okay? Mayor Cermak, C-E-R-M-A-K, by a man named Giuseppe Zangara. He was an Italian anarchist. A lot of people believe that this might have been a mafia thing, and not that FDR wasn't really the target. It was actually the Chicago mayor, Cermak, who had some tie-ins with the mafia. So some people believe it was a hit. It actually happened in Florida. But there was an assassination attempt. FDR is okay. He'll run again, and we're going to speed through some of this. There's Mayor Cermak down here. We're going to speed through. We'll get into, obviously, a lot more detail. In 1936, he wins again. In 1940, he wins again. And then 44, he wins again. He wins 4 elections. Now, isn't that illegal? I thought we could only serve 2 terms, 2 4-year terms. Okay, you got to remember, before FDR, there weren't any laws to say how many times you can run. It was always a tradition, and it goes back to George Washington. George Washington was offered the presidency for life, and he said, no, we just got out of a monarchy. We're not doing that again. So, and he served 2 terms. So it was always a tradition. FDR breaks that tradition. Now, after FDR, now we have it in law that you can only serve 2 terms. Okay, but he wins, and unfortunately he dies early in that 4th term. But he actually wins 4 terms. The only president to do that. So make sure you know that. And dies April 12th, 1945. Natural causes. Brain hemorrhage. Okay? Alright, that is it. That's FDR. Stay classy, Vandalia.